one is going to understand anything in philosophy, including ethics, including social and political philosophy, it all is reliant upon an understanding of this fundamental matter of metaphysics and ontology. Welcome. My name is Dr. Adrian Heathcote. This is the first in a series of lectures on the topic of philosophy. In particular, I'm going to be talking about that area of philosophy that is called metaphysics. Before I begin, it'll be worth giving a short background on what philosophy is. I suppose in general, one could say, what philosophers do is they try to reason about the world, to understand the world by reflection. Reflection not, as it were, divorced from our experiences, our sensations of the world, but including them and a basic sense of logic of what the world is like. This will become clearer as I go on. The relative weight to be given to reason, reflection versus experience is one of the major themes in metaphysics. Now, before talking about metaphysics, it's worth just a very broad background on what the areas of philosophy are. So you can put this into, as it were, place it on a map, mental map. First and most obvious area of philosophy, probably the one that most people intuitively think of, is ethics, how one should act. It goes back to the Greeks, and it is clearly of importance, even as one can say before philosophy began to be formulated in a very conscious way. The whole issue of how to act, what is a good action, what is a good person, was an important theme that needed to be discussed and to be laid out. Very much connected to this is social and political philosophy. Once groups of people form, what is the best form of their union as a people? How do they relate together? How should one understand the relationship of the individual to the group, etc., etc.? These are important issues in social and political philosophy. Now, in addition to these specifics of human behavior, there are aspects which have more to do with trying to sort out, as it were, further back at one level remove, how should one think? So the formula, if one is going to rely on reason, then one needs to know what reason is. And that was formulated very early on in a series of moves, of theories proposed by the Greeks principally, and reason that could be formulated in such a way that it didn't rely on deities. And this was called logic. The ideas of logic were principally formulated, though they existed earlier, but they were principally formulated in what is called the Hellenistic period. That is the late the late 4th and the 3rd century BC. And then it continued on through the Roman period. It became an enduring area of discussion and debate and argument itself. And then there is, in addition to the science of reason, which is logic, there is then the whole issue that we come to of how we know things. If we're looking for philosophical understanding, what does understanding mean? How do we know when understanding has been reached? This idea, this theory of understanding, this theory of how we come to know things, whether it's by the senses or by reason, if we do come to know things, what is knowledge? That area is called, in philosophy, epistemology. It's a Greek name, epistemology. And epistemology means the theory of knowledge. So we're not just interested in, as it were, in knowing things about the world. We also have to ask questions about the nature of that knowledge, the nature of the reasoning that allows us to come to knowledge, the nature and reliability of our senses in how we come to understand the world. All of these things are done together. They are all taken as areas of interest and dispute in trying to build up our understanding and knowledge of the world. And philosophy, you can see then, is a sort of an early set of inquiries as to how one should understand things. What is it one is trying to understand? Well, one is trying to understand the world. What does that mean, understanding the world? What about the world are we trying to understand? And the answer to that question is metaphysics. Metaphysics is the attempt to describe the world as it appears to us through reason and also through the senses, how the world can be understood and appreciated by us. What is that world made of? What is that world? What does it consist of? We need to understand that if we're going to even understand how we normally perceive things. What is it that we're doing when we do that? Are our perceptions even reliable for this purpose? We need to understand metaphysics in order to understand all of this. It then becomes the basis for all of science and all of our understanding of the world, whether we think of ourselves as scientists or not. Metaphysics is the study of what things are and how they interact with one another. The emphasis on what there is the core part of metaphysics itself. So inside metaphysics, there is a particular core to that, which is called ontology. Ontology is specifically that part of metaphysics which deals with what is, what exists. And it's there in the name, because ontology means being. Ontology is the theory of, so it's the theory of being. The theory of being. What kinds of things might we be interested in when we do ontology? Well, we would certainly be interested in material objects, what they are. What is it for something to be a material object? Are we entirely and only material objects? Do things that exist that are non-material, for example, the gods, are the gods material? If you believe in them, is what you're believing in a material being or a non-material being? And what other non-material beings might there be? Well, numbers might be, if they exist, non-material beings. We deal with them all the time. We understand them, we utilize them, we count things with them. What are numbers? What are mathematical entities in general? Because the Greeks, continuing on from obviously the Egyptians and from the Babylonians, thought in terms of, well, in terms of the world, in terms of an importance of number. Numbers were significant. Beyond simply counting things, beyond dividing things up equally, numbers were significant. They were fascinated by numbers from the Babylonian period and probably much earlier, from the Sumerian period, at the very least, going back probably still further. So numbers are important. What about other things? What time? What is that? We experience it in some ways, but it's not something we experience through the senses, other than that we sense that things are passing. But what is it? What is it for that time to pass? What does that mean? And the same question can be asked of space. What is that? It's something we exist in. What is it? What is the relationship between space and matter, if matter exists? What is that? So all of these things are things that are crucial questions. You may say, well, they're such crucial questions that one needs to understand all of this if one is going to understand anything in philosophy, including ethics, including social and political philosophy. It all is reliant upon an understanding of this fundamental matter of metaphysics and ontology. And the strange thing to say is that in a modern university, it is not well taught or well considered, in my experience. It tends to be done in a way which is not, which doesn't give you an understanding of it. And if you don't have an understanding of it, then you don't know the rest of it. Philosophy doesn't make any sense without its core. And its core aspects are, at heart, epistemology and metaphysics most of all. These two things, epistemology can even be said to subsume logic, but epistemology and metaphysics are the two core things which give everything its center, its rationale, its overarching sense of where things might fit together. And if you don't have that, then philosophy tends to be a wasted subject. It's a series of topics, a series of units, usually in a university, with those units don't fit together. And I think often the experience of people when they come to philosophy, whether it's through reading books or making an attempt to study it at a university, the end result is often a very incoherent and dissatisfying experience. And I include my own teaching of metaphysics when in all of this. I think I never observed metaphysics to be taught well, and I can't say I taught it particularly well myself. And this set of lectures is really an attempt to do it well, if I can possibly do that. So the idea is an unending series of lectures to try to lay out what I take to be the very core of philosophy, so that philosophy itself makes some sense as a whole. The philosophers today might give very different answers to the answers given by the Greeks. In fact, they almost certainly would. But the Greeks were the first to study metaphysics. It was really one of their earliest achievement. They put philosophy, as it were, had it of great importance, and metaphysics was the thing which was of central importance from the very beginning. So in trying to understand metaphysics, we have to go back to the Greeks. We can't start anywhere else. We have to go back to the Greeks, and we have to try to understand what they were doing when they were doing metaphysics. And we have to take their understanding and see where it leads us. And in the Greek period, it led very rapidly in different directions and with different consequences. Now, perhaps the earliest philosopher who was of great importance was Pythagoras. But we don't have any writings from him, and possibly he didn't write anything down himself. That's very likely. So the first piece of philosophy that we do have, apart from things which would be regarded usually as contributions to science, the first pure contribution to philosophy itself and to metaphysics itself came from Parmenides, a philosopher who was in the same vicinity as the Pythagoreans and has sometimes been regarded as a renegade Pythagorean. We'll come to the reasons for thinking that in the course of these lectures. The work that has survived, to some extent, not all of it has survived, but the work that has survived is sometimes called On Nature, but that's a conventional title, and almost everything that had a metaphysical character was given the title On Nature. That's an almost meaningless title. What it's often also called, more descriptively, is the poem of being. The poem of being, because it was written as a poem, as verses that laid out in the course of these verses an argument and a logic of what being was, and also what it couldn't be. Now, it's worth understanding this, in trying to understand this, understanding where this came from. Most people who think of philosophy think immediately of Athens in Greece and Socrates and Plato, etc. But this didn't occur in Athens. It occurred in southern Italy. That's where the beginnings of philosophy really lay, in southern Italy. In the part of the Greek world that was called Magna Graecia. Magna Graecia. It was Greater Greece, the largest part of Greece. And that was southern Italy. You could think of that as everything that was south of Naples. That was the center of early Greek philosophy, because it was where the Pythagoreans were. Pythagoras had moved there and had caused there to be a group gathered around him who were called the Pythagoreans. And Parmenides was situated slightly to the north of the Pythagoreans. The Pythagoreans were in the south, on the south coast, and the Parmenides was slightly to the north of that, halfway roughly between the Pythagoreans and Naples, although Naples didn't exist then. Okay, so this is Magna Graecia, and I want to show it to you first on a map so you can sort of picture this and where it is and how close it is to the Peloponnese, the what we now think of as Greece proper. And I'll go into this question of what is Greece, because it's a question that really people, if it's not sorted out early on in your own mind, you don't fully really grasp what Greek philosophy is. It's not just Athenian philosophy, it's something much broader than that. And it's worth having it fully in your mind and understanding this in order to understand Greeks and Greek philosophy. Almost none of it was done early on in Athens. Athens became important later. So here it is on a map, and you can see here where the Pythagoreans were. Here it is. Down here is where around here, Croton, you see. This is where the Pythagoreans were first established. Then they spread out into other parts along here. And up here, we have Elea, called Valia on the map. Okay. So we'll come back to this question of where philosophy began and how it fitted into later Greek philosophy. Now, it's important to stress one thing before I begin any of these lectures. These lectures are intended to be philosophy in action, philosophy being done. I'm not just simply giving you a guided tour of a museum, which is the Museum of Philosophy. If you ever had that in a philosophy course, that's not doing philosophy, and it's not learning philosophy either. You don't learn philosophy by being a complete spectator on other people doing it. You have to do it yourself. You have to learn to think philosophically. And that's my real aim here, is to, by the end of it, to make you philosophers so that you understand how to do this. It's not the case, as many people think, that you can just simply do a little bit of reading on Wikipedia and maybe get a book on this and you're off, you're a philosopher. That's not how it works. Philosophy is, to some extent, a skill. It's a skill in reading and understanding that, yes, you need to acquire it. You may have an innate skill for it, but you also need to acquire it. You need to be pointed in the right direction, and you need to see it in action. You need to see it, the understanding progresses in it. So my aim is to show you philosophy, as it were, being done. I'm an active philosopher. I've been a philosopher for probably more than 40 years now. I'm not going to count, but a long time. And so I want to impart this idea as it was imparted to me. In my studying philosophy, I learned from other people. The best philosophers that I knew were the teachers that I had in my undergraduate degree, and they imparted to me how to think as a philosopher as it was imparted to them by their teachers. So that's the aim. It's not just, I'm certainly not going to be just giving you a guided tour through a philosophy museum. That's not at all the idea. It's to show you what people thought and then to think about that, and not to withhold criticism where criticism is due and where it needs to be said. That's what philosophy is. It's a critical discipline. It's an argumentative discipline. We argue against one another, and we argue with the aim of convincing by reason, by rational argument, by convincing other people. So we will continue this series of lectures next time. Thank you. Hope to see you back.